because it's a physical event, because this is literally plates on a table that any person off the street can walk in and see, you would have a reporter, you'd have a governor, you'd have all of the people that are telling us that Joseph Smith is a con man going in there and seeing him and going, holy crap, Joseph Smith was not making it up. He's telling the truth. This is true. And they go out and you've got governors, you've got reporters saying, this is the real deal, guys. But instead, the God of Mormonism chooses two families to go in there that are already believers in the magical worldview to do it. To me, that tells you beyond any doubt that Joseph Smith knows that he doesn't have plates with ancient engravings, that he is making this up, whether it's a prop set of plates or whether it's something else.
That the 8 witnesses, you don't believe it was a natural, tangible viewing, seeing and holding the plates, but you believe it was some sort of a spiritual thing, that the plates were covered in a cloth, that they just saw the engravings in their mind, and that Joseph led them through some sort of spiritual, mystic, visionary experience. Fine. But don't argue that that's what the evidence and their statements support, because it doesn't.
Mormonism with the Murph, where Larry Singh explores church history and the church's truth claims.
Hello everyone, so in this episode I'm going to be doing a response to the LDS Discussions episode on Mormon Stories that they did of the 8 witnesses of the gold plates. I did a response to the one that they did on the 3 witnesses of the gold plates. It was about a 3-hour video where I took clips from their episode and then I tried to give my responses to them as well. And then at the very end, I had about 45 minutes worth of a lot of the primary and secondary statements of the 3 witnesses. I think I accumulated around 60 or so statements. So go back and watch that one if you haven't. In brief summary of my position, well, I do not believe that the testimony of the 3 witnesses of the gold plates is undeniable proof or evidence for the Book of Mormon. I did find that their video was not fully transparent or represented the witnesses and their character and their testimonies accurately or fairly, focusing primarily on a few second or third hand statements, really calling to question, did they really see the angel in the plates, or was it more spiritualized or eye of faith language? I showed in contrast how many people had to say very positive things about their character and the respect that they had in the community, particularly David Whitmer and Oliver Cowdery. And we looked at the vast majority of their first and second hand statements very much support that they know that they saw the angel and the plates with their eyes and with their ears. To them, it was no dream, no trick, no juggling or hallucination. And compounded upon this is the fact that the Book of Mormon prophesies within the Book of Ether and 2 Nephi 27 that the 3 witnesses would have a vision of the gold plates. Now, critics might want to argue that the 3 witnesses were maybe spiritually primed, having a magical worldview and a visionary mindset, and being believers, being open and susceptible to having a visionary experience. And of course, somebody might come to the conclusion that they do not believe in the supernatural, they do not believe that there is a God, or they might say that I think the evidence leans towards the Book of Mormon being non-historical. Therefore, the 3 witnesses' testimony of having a vision of the angel in the plates couldn't be real. It must have been some sort of a hallucination, which I think is an understandable position. But I didn't like how they were, just focusing on a few quotes and not taking into account the vast majority of their statements. And they're very much having the approach of, let's interpret the rest of their statements and their experience in light of these few second or third hand statements. Whereas I think you should look at them all collectively, and that will give you more of a taste for what the majority of their statements, particularly their primary statements, have to say about their experience. And then you can begin to filter and interpret the second or third hand statements in light of all the rest. So people saying that, well, there's a few quotes where Martin Harris talks about spiritual eyes, which means Martin didn't believe he actually saw them with his natural eyes. Therefore, he didn't really see the angel in the plates. We went through many of Martin's statements where he said very explicitly over and over that, as sure as you see my hand, did I see the plates. I saw with these eyes and heard with these ears. But of course, they would have used the language such as vision or eye of faith or spiritual eyes at times to describe their experience. But that doesn't take away them believing that the angel did in reality appear to them and show them the plates. Whether or not they really did have a real vision of seeing the angel in the plates, that is ultimately faith on our part if we choose to believe their testimonies or have a testimony of the Book of Mormon. But it's important that we accurately represent their statements collectively. I've had to wait a little bit to do a response to the episode they did on the 8 witnesses. There's just been a lot going on in my personal life between work and also other projects and episodes that I'm currently working on. And I definitely would in the future like to do a response series, maybe a panel discussion series to LDS discussions. I think it is probably one of the best critical resources that has really good synthesis of a lot of the critical arguments going against the truth claims. And I think that they have, for the most part, done a very successful job in this series. And I feel like it does need to be responded to by people on the apologetic side. And while I think for the most part they do a very good job representing the critical side, I felt in, especially in these episodes on the witnesses, in light of all the research that I have done, I didn't feel like they were fairly represented, and I felt the need to give a response. And I didn't feel like they presented strong arguments or a strong case against the witnesses. But I'm not going to try to engage in any ad hominem or make this personal. I have nothing against them, but it's more to go after some of the arguments and points being made and to give my responses. Obviously, with the disclaimer that it is obviously faith, whether or not we believe the witnesses had their experience or not, and really them claiming to see an angel and there being ancient, authentic gold plates that Joseph Smith presented to the 8 witnesses. That is kind of a miraculous claim. There are times in this episode where they do go down different side tangents, so I'm really going to respond to the clips where they're addressing the 8 witnesses specifically. Okay, so we're going to begin watching the first clip.
So I just want to give a little bit of background. So as we discussed previously, the 3 witnesses are referenced 4 times in the Book of Mormon, and that's Ether, 2nd Nephi, in a couple of in chapter 11, 27, and then another time in 27. The only reference in the Book of Mormon to the 8 witnesses comes from 2nd Nephi 27, verses 12 through 13, that reads, "The eyes of none shall behold it, save it be that 3 witnesses shall behold it by the power of God, besides him to whom the book shall be delivered. And they shall testify to the truth of the book and the things therein." And here's the reference. "And there is none other which shall view it, save it be a few, according to the will of God, to bear testimony of his word unto the children of men."
Okay, and I've often made the argument in the last episode that the Book of Mormon seems to prophesy or promise that witnesses would see the plates. And I do agree with her that that seems to be the only references to the 8 witnesses of the gold plates. But I do think that is an argument in favor for this being a very miraculous and a very impressive thing for Joseph to promise or prophesy in the Book of Mormon if he was the author, and then to pull that off naturalistically, that they had this mass hallucination. Of course, Joseph just could have shown gold plates in a natural way, so I don't think it's as impressive a prophecy when it comes to the 8 witnesses. But of course, if you believe the Book of Mormon is inspired and ancient, then this is a prophecy which came to pass.
Okay, so what's interesting is that the 3 Nephites, or the 3 witnesses was referenced in the Book of Mormon, but the only reference is "save it be a few." That's the only time the 8 witnesses are discussed, and so it seems like an afterthought to me, rather than, if you think of the Book of Mormon as a 19th century text, Joseph Smith is writing it, and it seems like the 8 witnesses ideas came later.
Yeah, I'm not going to take seriously anything that starts to say only certain people get to see X, Y, and Z, because John 1:18 is "No man has seen God at any time, the only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him." And then you've got the Book of Mormon full of people that see God or see the finger of God, or Joseph Smith sees God directly. So it's I'm not taking it too seriously about who gets to see God and who doesn't, and declarations that only certain people are going to get to see plates. And yeah,
I would reference people to go check out the episode that me and Robert Boylan did on "Can Man See God" as well, because there's other passages or places in the Bible where people can see God, people have seen God. I feel like a very similar argument could be made against Jesus' resurrection. Well, if the gold plates were real, why didn't God show them to everybody? It's the same with Jesus' resurrection. We had witnesses of Christ's resurrection, the 12 apostles, Mary Magdalene, and others, like the men on the road to Emmaus. But somebody could make the same argument, well, why doesn't God show Jesus' resurrected body to everybody? Which obviously Christians would believe, well, God wants you to have faith. Christ said to doubting Thomas, "You have seen and believed. More blessed are they who have not seen and also believed." And it would be the position that God had chosen witnesses to add support and be corroborating evidence in favor for the Book of Mormon, but not to provide undeniable proof to the world. And if you're going to make this argument that God should have shown the gold plates to everybody, you could make the same argument that he should have done the same for Jesus' resurrection. Okay, let's see what they say next.
This, to me, follows a little bit of similar pattern in terms of the way that these 8 witnesses, the story rolls out. It shows you where Joseph Smith is insecure. It shows you where he's confident. And I think that gives us a little bit more insight. Whereas the 3 witnesses is more like, yeah, we went out, we saw a vision. I don't believe, as we talked about in the last episode, that the stories are very inconsistent, and there are very few believing Mormons that if they heard these stories from another religion would say, oh yeah, that religion is true. They'd say these guys are making it up. And I would argue this one with the 8 is a lot less credible in terms of like, that kind of visionary stuff, but it also gives you a better window into what Joseph's doing. So I'm rambling a bit, but I want to just clarify. The reason I think it's more important is to kind of like how the sausage is made more than anything else.
So Mike's saying that there were some inconsistencies in the testimony of the 3 witnesses. When you have like around 150 statements of the witnesses, there's always going to be some anomalies, especially when they're second and third hand statements and recording of interviews with them. I particularly found that whenever I was going through a lot of the data of what people had to say with regards to the translation of the Book of Mormon. But I find in general, the vast majority of their statements remarkably consistent and very credible. And I don't think they can be impeached by inconsistent statements. I found there to be a lot of consistency, that they seem to be very adamant and emphatic over and over and over again of them seeing the angel in the plates.
So is what you're saying essentially that if we're looking at the 3 and 8 witnesses as Joseph's attempt to increase the credibility of his claims, then the 8 witnesses is a lot less thorough an attempt than the 3?
Yeah,
and opens him up to more.
Or less credible? Less credible?
Yeah,
Mike?
less credible, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I think overall their testimonies are remarkably consistent, which doesn't mean they really did have a vision of the angel in the plates. But I don't think you can just throw out their testimonies based upon inconsistent statements. So I think Mike seems to be saying that he sees the 8 as less credible, and you have a better idea to what Joseph Smith is doing. Like for believers or apologists, we would see the combination of the 3 witnesses who had a supernatural visionary experience and 8 witnesses who saw the plates in a very natural, tangible way, not in a visionary way. The combination of the 2 combine and compound together as 2 different types of witnesses supporting the authenticity of Joseph having plates. Now, they seem to be implying that the 8 witnesses maybe aren't as credible, and in a way, like they didn't have the miraculous supernatural experience of the 3 witnesses, but it could be very easy to just dismiss the 3 witnesses as, well, they just had this mass hallucination, but the 8 witnesses claim to just see and handle and hold plates.
So this is from B.H. Roberts in Volume 1 of the History of the Church. He says, the difference between the testimony given the 3 witnesses and that given to the 8 is that the former was attended by a splendid display of glory and power of God and the ministration of an angel, while the latter was attended by no such display, but was a plain, matter-of-fact exhibition of the plates by the prophet to his friends. And I want you all to remember that last sentence, because that is, to me, gives the game away, and we'll go through that as we go through this episode. But that sentence right there tells you why this is such a big problem as we go through these different accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't really see exactly how that's such a big problem. I think I know that they're going to argue the quote and the statement from Stephen Burnett and the one from Theodore Turley with John Whitmer, trying to argue that it was not a natural viewing of the plates, but a supernatural or visionary viewing through a cloth. However, I believe as we go through a lot of the statements, and even some of the statements they'll go through in this video, the very vast majority of the witnesses' primary statements support the official testimony of them seeing and handling the plates.
It's actually more problematic in a way. And so because we're being told by the church that this one is a physical event, it's like saying to you, Julia, there is a mug on your table that if you walk in, you can see. And if you call your neighbor over, they could come in and see. There's no need for a spiritual being to bring that mug down to you, right? Because of that, it shows you how little confidence Joseph Smith has in the credibility of these plates. Because if it's truly a matter-of-fact visit, you would bring the local reporters, you'd bring the governor, you'd bring like a local mayor, all these people, all the people that have said, Joseph Smith, you're a con man, he'd be like, let's check it, let's go.
Well, it did say in the Book of Mormon that they would only be shown to a few according to the will of God. And there's lots of people who are trying to steal the plates from Joseph as well. And it would make sense that it would be shown to believers, similar as Jesus's resurrection. It was shown to the disciples, to the apostles. Again, if you're going to make the argument that Joseph should have shown the plates to everybody, you can make the same argument that Jesus' resurrection, his resurrected body, should have been shown to everyone in the world then as well.
And yeah, as we'll see, he doesn't do that because he knows full well that anyone who is not part of that magic worldview would walk in and be like, yeah, at most this is a prop set of plates that can't pass physical inspection. So
interesting how he's going to say that, well, the plates can't pass visual inspection. That's why I didn't show them to anyone. But when you look at the testimony of the 8 witnesses and a lot of their primary statements that they give after, and even some that they read through in this video, they do reiterate the official testimony of seeing and handling the plates, seeing the engravings. So they obviously pass a visual inspection for the 8 witnesses.
As physical inspection. So because of the church wanting this to be such a physical experience, to me, it shows you even more, based on how Joseph Smith acts with them, that he knows that they aren't what he claims them to be.
All right.
But James Strang does what you just said. So James Strang finds these Vori plates, and he has his witnesses, his 4 witnesses with him to help him dig it up, and they find it. But then he carries it with him, and he shows everybody these little plates. But Joseph Smith doesn't do that. He never shows the plates to just anybody. It's these very specific people.
That's true. And Strang did have his own set of plates, and the witnesses signed that they buried up and dug up the plates as well. One of the differences between James Strang and Joseph Smith is that he had natural witnesses who I think they attested and gave their testimony that like these were plates that were dug up and that they saw the plates. And again, if you only had 8 witnesses, you could say that Joseph duped them with a fake set of plates that he manufactured. If you only had the 3 witnesses, you could say maybe they just had a hallucination. Having both types of witnesses do reinforce and support each other.
Okay, so going over the testimony of the 8 witnesses, Nemo, do you want to just go ahead and run through that and read it?
Yep. Be it known unto all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people unto whom this work shall come, that Joseph Smith Jr., the translator of this work, has shown unto us the plates, of which hath been spoken, which have the appearance of gold, and as many of the leaves as the said Smith has translated, we did handle with our hands. And we also saw the engravings thereon, all of which has the appearance of ancient work and of curious workmanship. And this we bear record with words of soberness, that the said Smith has shown unto us, for we have seen and hefted, and know of a surety that the said Smith has got the plates, of which he has spoken. And we give our names unto the world, to witness unto the world that which we have seen, and we lie not, God bearing witness of it. Christian Whitmer, Jacob Whitmer, Peter Whitmer Jr., John Whitmer, Hiram Page, Joseph Smith Sr., Hyrum Smith, Samuel H. Smith.
Saying they saw it, hefted it, and with their own hands. So that's almost like pre-addressing this later concern about spiritual eyes. They're trying to say this was physical.
Well, yeah, so they've read the official testimony of the 8 witnesses. They claim to see the plates, to have held and turned the leaves, to have examined the engravings, of being very curious or very fine. And yeah, they're just saying that they saw and handled these plates. They're not claiming any sort of visionary experience. It's just a natural viewing, a different type of witness.
Pre-addressing this later concern about spiritual eyes, they're trying to say this was physical.
Well, I don't know if this was them trying to pre-address it, but this is just what they have recorded as their official testimony.
Not visionary, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the selling point of the 8 witnesses isn't that just there's now numerically more people that seen it. It's that they've seen it in a way that the 3 witnesses didn't even see it. They've handled it. They've interacted with it physically.
Right.
Referenced almost all of them, with the exception of Martin Harris. All of the witnesses were related to the Whitmers or the Smiths. So you have Oliver Cowdery, who was married to Elizabeth Ann Whitmer, and you have David Whitmer, Christian, Jacob, Peter Whitmer, John Whitmer. Hiram Page was married to Catherine Whitmer, and then you have Joseph Smith Sr., Hyrum Smith, and Samuel Smith.
And tell us why that matters, Julia.
I guess it's just interesting to me because, like, we talked about the background of the people before, where the Whitmers, the Smiths, and Martin Harris, they were all in this magic worldview mindset. They all believed in seer stones, divining rods. Joseph Smith's family were treasure diggers. Martin Harris, like, he believed in some really kooky things. Like, he thought he was talking to Jesus, who was in the form of a deer. He thought he had a devil sitting on his chest at one.
Okay, and just a quick response to the account of like Jesus appearing to Martin in the form of a deer. That does come third hand from a gentleman in Palmyra. I believe it's to John A. Clark. So we don't have anything firsthand from Martin Harris claiming that. So I'm not going to say he definitely never claimed that, but it's not something that he ever claimed in any of his other statements. So this is sort of hearsay. But yeah, I can understand people making that argument that, okay, you're not going to say they're part of a conspiracy because many of them leave and still reaffirm their testimonies. But you could try and make the argument that they had this magical worldview, they had this treasure digging, this visionary mindset, and that they could have been easily duped. I think it's different, though, when it comes to the 8 witnesses. because they claim to just be shown these sets of plates. Now, could they determine whether or not they were ancient or not, or whether the characters engraved on them were authentic? No. But they do support Joseph having some sort of plates, which to them seem to pass visible inspection.
Like, everyone's just in this magic worldview, so having them all be witnesses is kind of problematic to me.
And sure, like, they would have believed in maybe some folk magic things, you know, in objects like seer stones or dowsing rods or in treasure, but there were lots of people that had those beliefs. I don't think we can just automatically dismiss or reject them as they're completely uncredible because of having certain views.
Because they all come from this same stock.
Yeah, for me, it speaks to the issue of a possible conspiracy and or undue influence, you know, because obviously the more families, the more conspirators, the more people involved, the more the chance of credibility, right? The
Yeah.
more insular, the more chance of a conspiracy in one way or another.
Like, of course, you could say a possible conspiracy, but really, I don't think any serious critic would argue that the 3 or 8 witnesses were part of a conspiracy, particularly after, you know, the Whitmers leaving the church and John Whitmer's statement later that we're going to read from Theodore Turley when he's doubting and questioning the work. And he's asked, like, well, do you not deny your testimony? He said, no, like, I saw and handled the plates. There were fine engravings on both sides. But then when he's asked, well, why don't you follow Joseph Smith? He says, well, I don't know if the translation is correct or not. You know, even when he's most disillusioned, he can't determine whether or not the plates and the engravings are ancient and divine or not. So regardless of what other beliefs they might have had, the 8 witnesses particularly seem to affirm about seeing and handling something in a very natural way.
Okay, so I just want to point out that the sources that we are about to go over are by no means every source available on this topic. What I'm sharing are the sources that do not align with the testimony of the 3 and 8 witnesses. Some of them that I share do align, so that's I'm just going to put that out there. I'm not so I'm just saying that this is not a compilation of all that's available.
I appreciate that she acknowledges that she's not going to be covering all of the sources or statements from the 8 witnesses, but she does have a fairly decent overview. So I do credit that.
Yeah, Julia's still in grad school, basically.
Yeah. With what was said about the 8 witnesses, I wanted to add a source that I summarized in the last episode, and I just wanted to give it fully here. So hopefully that's okay. So this source is about Oliver Cowdery denying his testimony of the Book of Mormon. So this source comes from a man named G.J. Keene, and it was signed on April 14th of 1885. And so, actually, does someone else want to read this? John, do you want to read his quote?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We accordingly waited on Mr. Cowdery at his residence in Tiffin, and there learned his connection from him with that order and his full and final renunciation thereof. We then inquired of him if he had any objection to making a public recantation. He replied that he had objections, that in the first place, it could do no good, that he had known several to do so, and they always regretted it. And in the second place, it would have a tendency to draw public attention, invite criticism, and bring him into contempt. But, said he, nevertheless, if the church require it, I will submit to it. But I authorize and desire you and the church to publish and make known my recantation. We did not demand it, but submitted his name to the church, and he was unanimously admitted a member thereof. At that time, he arose and addressed the audience present, admitted his error and implored forgiveness, and said he was sorry and ashamed of his connection with Mormonism. He continued his membership while he resided in Tiffin and became superintendent of the Sabbath school and led an exemplary life while he resided with us. So that's clearly scandalous to Mormons. And I guess Mormons are going to say those are like evangelical anti-Mormons that are making this up. Is that?
I guess. So like with Oliver Cowdery specifically, I know this isn't about, that's for the episode before, but like people say that the 3 witnesses didn't deny, but it really does seem like Oliver Cowdery did deny, because we have witnesses here from this other church that says, yeah, he was totally willing to deny. We didn't require it because Oliver's giving reasons why he shouldn't, because people will get angry with him. It'll bring negative publicity, like things like that it just would be too much trouble for him. But he said he would be willing to submit. And then even in the Times and Seasons, they published that Oliver Cowdery had denied his testimony of the Book of Mormon. And then there's other things that like Like his is just really problematic to me to say that none of the witnesses denied. It really does seem like Oliver Cowdery did.
I would say is that this source comes from 1885, which means we can't just dismiss it, but this is after Oliver's death, so that Oliver could not verify it or not. And we have statements from like David Whitmer and his wife, Elizabeth Cowdery, that said under any circumstance, Oliver never denied but reaffirmed his testimony. But even granting, like, say if he was willing to reject or renounce Mormonism to try to join this other church, the fact that he came back and reaffirmed his testimony till the end of his life, I think shows his integrity and that he couldn't deny and believed in what he experienced. So I'm not going to be dismissive of it, but I'm also going to be skeptical of it.
And then apply the same to Oliver Cowdery.
Yeah.
And so since later he did affirm his testimony, I guess the position would be he got excommunicated. He was salty. He was part of a community that he wanted to be embraced in. He renounced it. But then later, maybe things didn't work out with that community. And he realized, like Richard Bushman, his only real relevance is in his highest, true, most significant relevance is within a Mormon context. And so he rejoined or reaffirmed his statement until he died because it was in his best interest to do so, not necessarily because he really believed it.
Well, I think that's a very uncharitable view to have towards Oliver Cowdery and say towards people like Richard Bushman. I think we should attribute the best motives to people, that he came back probably because he sincerely believed and wanted to rejoin the church again and reaffirmed his testimony, whether or not it is true or not. Same with people like Richard Bushman or why I came back to the church. People tend to do it out of sincere motives.
All right. Ultimately, it's speculation, right? I mean, he rejoins the church in 1848, dies in 1850. So, I mean, I think at that point, you're just trying to get into his head. But, obviously, we do have multiple documents or multiple accounts that are at least indicating that Oliver is either willing to do it or in the times and season that he did kind of renounce it. And so, you can't throw it all out, I guess what I would say. I don't know that I buy in totally that he was going around saying he's willing to kind of completely renounce the church. But at the same time, there's something to it. It's just trying to figure out what that is.
I appreciate Mike's response there because we can't get into Oliver's head and speculate. I also don't believe that Oliver would have been, rejecting and denying particularly his experience as a witness. But I could see, because he's been excommunicated from the church, him wanting to, turn away from Mormonism and almost reject the church in a way, but not necessarily rejecting his own spiritual experiences. Because many people at that time believed Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet, and Oliver Cowdery may have fallen into the same camp. Again, we're not sure.
So I want to just kind of outline this. 2 of the 8 witnesses never gave any personal accounts of their witness to the golden plates. And aside from John Whitmer, the rest are limited. So with Christian Whitmer, there's nothing else except for this signed statement. With Jacob Whitmer, there's 2 that come from his kids. Peter Whitmer, there's no other testimony. John Whitmer, actually, I think he was the most interviewed of the 8 witnesses. There are 9 at least. And then Hiram Page, there's 1 other very limited account, which we'll talk about. And then Joseph Smith Sr., there's only 1. And then Hiram Smith, there was 5, which are also kind of limited. And then Samuel Smith, there are 2. So there's just not a whole lot to go on. I think that the 3 witnesses, everyone put the weight on the 3 witnesses and not on the 8, it seems to me.
Okay.
I agree with her. It seems that we definitely do not have as many statements or as many documents from the 8 witnesses as we do 3, which is a pity. It's good the ones that we do have, but obviously it would be great if we had more.
That part about Joseph Smith literally declaring the stone
of the devil
created by the devil, that's almost like the Zelf, where he's like walking along and it's like, oh, there's stones, that's Zelf. Like, do Mormons today really believe that Joseph got inspiration from God, that the stone that his challenger was using at some point in history, spiritual Satan, who doesn't even have a body, is somehow sitting there, somehow holding a stone that he can't even physically hold because he's not a resurrected being, but that somehow he performed some magical incantation on the stone to make it evil, so that then Hiram Page would find it and then produce false testimony? Like that. But
they have to. They have to, because Joseph Smith had to nuke this. He had to just destroy it entirely, because the problem was not only was Hiram Page running around saying it, but the people that Joseph was relying on for credibility were believing it. So
Yep.
Joseph can't undermine those individuals, otherwise he undermines his own credibility for the Book of Mormon. So he's just got to nuke the stone because he can't go after the Book of Mormon. So all he can do is go after the stone and hope that people don't go, well, hang on, if Hyrum was deceived by that, what else could he have been deceived by?
Yeah.
If Joseph says he's been deceived.
I actually think they're making a decent and fair argument about Hiram Page and believing that he was receiving revelations through a stone, and that he, was a believer in folk magic and seer stones and having this magical worldview. And if he was wrong about receiving revelations through the stone, then could he have been wrong or not a reliable witness when it came to seeing the plates? However, I think they're making a good argument, but it's also a non sequitur to say that if he was wrong about receiving revelation through a stone, therefore he is wrong in his testimony and witness of seeing the plates. And while the 8 witnesses believe that the gold plates were ancient and from an angel, so even if he believed other really strange things, his testimony, one of the 8 witnesses, is that he was shown that he saw and handled the plates. But I think they're really trying to argue that these witnesses, they had this magical worldview, they were superstitious, they were gullible, and that they believed in all of these supernatural magical things. So then we can't really take their testimonies of the plates too seriously. And again, if they claim a visionary experience, then I think that you can understand that. But their testimony of the plates is very much just they're shown plates.
Also,
Yeah, this
this is also giving me David Whitmer vibes, because as we've covered in previous episodes, David Whitmer publishes this pamphlet to all believers in Christ, where he's like, all that Melchizedek priesthood stuff that Joseph claimed later, that never happened. Like, so we're supposed to believe David Whitmer when, we're putting him as a witness to the Book of Mormon, but not believing him, when he says the Melchizedek priesthood was made up after the fact. We're supposed to believe Hiram Page is a credible witness to the Book of Mormon, but then when he uses a seer stone to produce prophecy or revelation that challenges Joseph Smith, we're supposed to believe he's deceived by Satan. Isn't there a little inconsistency there?
Right.
Well, when it comes to the priesthood restoration, and I've done a video on this, David Whitmer did believe that it was later made up after the fact. He was not aware of it. And that's certainly what David Whitmer believed. The evidence would seem to point to that Joseph and Oliver did not begin speaking about their experience of being ordained to the Aaronic priesthood by John the Baptist or the Melchizedek priesthood until 1834, 1835. Now, Joseph did write about the administration of angels in his 1832 history. So I don't think David is lying, but from his point of view, he believes that it didn't happen because he presumes that he should have known in 1829. But it appears that Joseph and Oliver did not begin talking about it widely until 1834. And again, they're making the argument that if David Whitmer or Hiram Page were wrong in one instance, that means we can't trust them when it comes to their testimony of the gold plates.
Holding and inspecting the plates, a few of the witnesses said they handled the plates. And then he says, I desire to testify to all that will come to the knowledge of this address, that I have most assuredly seen the plates from whence the Book of Mormon is translated, and that I have handled these plates, and know of a surety that Joseph Smith Jr. has translated the Book of Mormon by the gift and power of God. And in this thing, the wisdom of the wise most assuredly has perished. Therefore know ye, O ye inhabitants of the earth, wherever this address may come, that I have in this thing freed my garments of your blood, whether you believe or disbelieve. So he's saying that he sees the plates and he handles them.
But otherwise, it's a pretty straight up affirmation of what was in the witness statement, correct?
Yeah. And again, John was the one that was the most, John Whitmer was the one that was most interviewed, and he's the one that we have most of these from, the positive affirming statements that he did see the plates. Mike, do you want to read this letter?
Yeah, so that's a first-hand statement, 1836, I believe, from John Whitmer. And in that same statement as well, he also says that he had no hesitancy in signing his name to the official testimony or affidavit, which really does undermine the claim from Stephen Burnett that the 8 witnesses were hesitant to sign their name to that instrument. As we have John Whitmer saying in that account that he wasn't hesitant at all. And yeah, this is firsthand affirming the official testimony.
Yeah, so he wrote, when I came to hear Martin Harris state in public that he never saw the plates with his natural eyes, only in vision or imagination, neither Oliver nor David, and also that the 8 witnesses never saw them and hesitated to sign that instrument for that reason, but were persuaded to do it, The last pedestal gave way. In my view, our foundation was sapped, and the entire superstructure fell in a heap of ruins. I therefore, 3 weeks since in the stone chapel, renounced the Book of Mormon. After we were done speaking, Martin Harris arose and said he was sorry for any man who rejected the Book of Mormon, for he knew it was true. He said he had hefted the plates repeatedly in a box with only a tablecloth or a handkerchief over them, but he never saw them, only as he saw a city through a mountain, and said that he never should have told that the testimony of the 8 was false if it had not been picked out of him, but should have let it pass as it was.
Yeah, so we have this, we talked about this before, and this is more talking about Martin Harris denying that they saw the plates, that he saw them. But it also has that sentence about the 8 witnesses never saw them and they hesitated to sign the instrument for that reason, but then they were persuaded to sign. And so that's the important part here. So, because I said earlier that...
Sure, Martin Harris is saying that the 8 witnesses said they never saw the plates and were pressured to sign the statement.
Yes.
And that's Stephen Burnett quoting Martin Harris.
Right.
In
Yeah, and that was in 1838.
Which is around that Kirtland apostasy time, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
So key, because a lot of apologists will say Martin Harris clarified later, blah, blah. No, he clarified that he was sorry. He told everybody. He's sorry. He said the quiet part out loud. So yeah, he does not deny what he said. All he's saying is, like you said, I shouldn't have said that. Yeah, that's all it is. And so this letter is from believing. These are believing members trying to figure out what to do. They're basically meeting to try to figure out, because they've all been basically upset with Joseph Smith because he's making all these horrible mistakes, like the Kirtland Safe Society, and they're trying to figure out if the Book of Mormon should still be believed, because they know Joseph Smith has no power from God, because I mean, it speaks for itself. So that's why Martin Harris is trying to persuade them to still believe in the Book of Mormon. But as this is happening, this statement about the witnesses is coming out, and the people who were believing members who are not sure if they want to be are seeing this and going, yeah, I'm out. Just as if I was in the missionary discussions and the missionary's like, yeah, so these 8 people, they like never really saw it, but they signed it and they're all in 2 families, but you could believe them. I'd be like if you're watching Shark Tank, I'd be like, with that, I'm out. But they don't tell you that. You don't have those details. So once these guys got the details, they're like, yeah, this is nonsense.
Okay, and I would say this is probably the best source that people would use to say that the 8 witnesses didn't really see the plates. Now, this is secondhand. This is, well, Stephen Burnett recording what Martin supposedly said. I do believe Martin would have used the language of like vision, and often in other times Martin would have said spiritual eyes. He would never have used the language for imagination, but that's why I believe Stephen Burnett, his interpretation of what Martin said. And with regards to the 8 witnesses, like, yeah, this is kind of troubling if Martin did in fact say this. Now, this is, I guess, third hand is from the 8 witnesses, if he did, recorded by Stephen Burnett. Now, you would think that Martin Harris would have a close enough association with the 8 witnesses, but he was not there for their experience. None of the 8 witnesses ever bring up, being hesitant to sign their testimony, their name to the official testimony. In fact, we have the opposite from John Whitmer. And Samuel Smith even had in his Book of Mormon his name asterisked and underlined. So it seemed like they weren't hesitant to want to talk about being one of the 8 witnesses. And you think John Whitmer, even when he was out of the church, he would have talked about that, saying that, well, we were forced or pressured to have signed our name to it. But yeah, I think this is a question mark, because even though Martin did after reaffirm his testimony of the Book of Mormon that he knows it's true, Burnett seems to be taken away from what Martin said, that none of the 8 witnesses really did see it. Now, I think when he says that the testimony of the 8 was false, Burnett seems to write later, false as in it's not the same as in the official testimony, but that they really saw the plates covered in a cloth in a very visionary way. The only thing that I'm hesitant or skeptical when it comes to this source is because when we look at all of the other statements from the 8 witnesses, they seem to support the official testimony of seeing and handling the plates, bar one, which is maybe a little bit ambiguous. Now, there is language that the 3 witnesses could only see through the eye of faith. Is it possible that Martin Harris thought that the 8 witnesses only could have seen the plates in some sort of a visionary way? Perhaps, I don't know. And I have an episode coming up with Stephen Smoot and Neil Rapley where they really do dive in deep and respond to each of the claims that Stephen Burnett makes. So I will reference people to go watch that for a deeper dive. But the thing which I am most skeptical or hesitant about when it comes to this account from Stephen Burnett is when we look at the statements from the 8 witnesses that we have, they really do seem to support the official testimony. And people might say, well, we must interpret those statements in light of this statement from Stephen Burnett. I come more from the angle that I think we should interpret Stephen Burnett's account in light of the first and second-hand statements that we have of the 8 witnesses.
Reportedly said to Theodore Turley in April 1838, "I handled those plates. They were fine engravings on both sides. I handled them. They were shown to me by a supernatural power." And I pulled this one out because I thought it was really interesting, because he's saying that they were shown to him by a supernatural power. But as we know with the story of the 8 witnesses, Joseph Smith just had the plates with him because the translation process was still underway. He still had them. So and then even
which he was shown, and he's kind of leaning into that narrative, perhaps.
Pretty speculative comment.
why?
Well,
I mean, that is the way memory works, is as you're storing it and retrieving it, and then history happens, you're always adding and removing things from your memory. So maybe he just remembers the 3 witnesses stuff and then adds it in a later account.
and maybe he's retreating. Like, you can retreat into the unprovable. So he realizes that his testimony is a physical one, and it is about physically handling some plates. But if he can retreat into a space of supernatural powers, then it's much harder for people to disprove.
I don't think these are good arguments. I think if I were a critic, the way I would interpret and argue why is he saying that he saw it by supernatural power, I would argue as a critic that I would say the witnesses, their experience was actually the plates were covered in a cloth because they couldn't pass visual inspection. So in fact, they had a visionary or supernatural viewing of the plates. So when he talks about seeing and handling the plates, he handled them, but he saw them in a supernatural or a visionary way through the cloth, supporting Stephen Burnett's statement about none of the 8 witnesses actually seeing the plates. So I don't know why they didn't make that argument. And then critics would say that, okay, well, all of the other statements where they talk about, like, I saw and handled the plates, the seeing of the plates was actually through a visionary way, and we have to interpret all their other statements as, well, when they say they saw them, it was in a visionary way. However, one of the issues I have with this source is, one, all of John Whitmer's other statements, he seems to refer to seeing and handling the plates in a natural way. There's even an account where he's asked, did you see the plates uncovered? Or did you see the plates covered with a cloth? And he said, no, they were presented to us uncovered. Although critics like Vogel think that maybe this isn't the most credible account because it has different details about how many witnesses see the plates at a time and where the location is. But there's even a quote from a letter by Myron Bond, and John Whitmer says, "Old Father Whitmer told me last winter with tears in his eyes that he knew as well as he knew he had an existence that Joseph translated the ancient writing which was upon the plates, which he saw and handled, and which is one of the scribes he helped to copy as the words fell from Joseph's lips by supernatural or almighty power." So in this account, John Whitmer is reaffirming seeing and handling the plates as one of the 8 witnesses, but uses that same phrase of supernatural power, but in describing the dictation of the Book of Mormon. So it's possible that Turley, and I believe this was Thomas Bullock who recorded this in the History of the Church, this could be a conflation of his recording of John Whitmer's statements of supernatural power, because in all of the other statements John Whitmer gives, he talks about seeing and handling in a natural way. Or really, John Whitmer just might have believed that this was similar to the dictation of the Book of Mormon, there being almighty or supernatural power involved, believing that the showing of the gold plates involves supernatural or almighty power, but not claiming that he saw the plates in a visionary way. And there's no statement from him saying that the plates were covered with a cloth. I feel like that is an inference that critics make, but nowhere did the 8 witnesses ever claim that they saw it in a visionary way or that the plates were covered in a cloth. But something interesting, the next part of Turley's statement, it reads that John Whitmer admitted that he could not read the engravings, and therefore he did not know whether the translation is true or not. And it seems strange to me that if it was a visionary or supernatural viewing, that he would make the statement, that he would question the authenticity of the engravings and the translation if it was a supernatural visionary experience. But I can totally understand, because at this point he's been excommunicated and he's out of the church and he's feeling very disillusioned with the work. And he's being asked, like, well, if you're one of the 8 witnesses, how can you no longer be following Joseph Smith or questioning the divinity of the work? But if he just saw and handled the plates, I can understand him saying, like, well, yeah, I saw and handled the plates, but I don't know if the engravings are authentic. I don't know if the translation's correct. So even at his most disillusioned, he still didn't deny, seeing and handling. Whereas if it was a visionary or supernatural viewing, I feel like if he was questioning Joseph Smith and questioning the work, you feel like he would have questioned his whole experience. He might have said, well, actually, I don't think I really did see the plates. Come to think of it, they were covered with a cloth, and I had some visionary experience, but maybe Joseph got us into this religious frenzy. But if he just saw them naturally, then I can totally understand him making this comment about, well, I don't know if the translation's correct, because there was no miraculous visionary element to his experience. So I feel like that statement that he makes after doesn't make much sense to me if it was a visionary viewing of the plates. Because how could he deny or question the Book of Mormon if he saw it in a vision? If he saw the plates in a visionary way? So I think it's an ambiguous statement, and it is the one that critics would use to support their thesis of them seeing it in vision covered in a cloth. But I feel like this last portion seems to be more consistent with it being a natural viewing.
So Hirum's testimony was published in the Times and Seasons in 1839. Hiram Smith gave us his testimony of the gold plates. He says, "I thank God that I felt a determination to die rather than deny the things which my eyes had seen, which my hands had handled, and which I had borne testimony to wherever my lot has been cast." So that's
It's consistent.
Yeah, it's consistent, but it's also very brief. He doesn't elaborate.
It's on message.
Yeah, no, it's very, very consistent with the official testimony. There's another time when Hiram Smith, it's recorded. He was talking about the Book of Mormon, of which he is one of the witnesses, and he said that he had but 2 hands and 2 eyes. He said he had seen the plates with his eyes and handled them with his hands. And I can't help but wonder if this is sort of a response, because this is like a year after of him clarifying that, no, we really did see them with our eyes. With our eyes and with our hands, and I only have 2 eyes and 2 hands. It wasn't a spiritual viewing.
Her book, written in 1844, Lucy Mack Smith gave more of a background for the 8 witnesses, like B.H. Roberts alluded to. She says they all, that is the male part of the company, repaired to a little grove where it was customary for the family to offer up their secret prayers. As Joseph has been instructed that the plates would be carried there by one of the ancient Nephites, here it was that those 8 witnesses recorded in the Book of Mormon looked upon the plates and handled them, of which they bear witness in the following words. And then she quotes the 8 witness statement. And then she says, after the witnesses returned to the house, the angel again made his appearance to Joseph and received the plates from his hands. And so actually thinking about this now, she's saying that, and I haven't heard this before outside of her, I think, she's saying that an angel, so this is during the translation process because it hasn't been completed. So she's saying, even though Joseph has the plates, the angel comes to the grove with the plates. They see them. I guess they don't see the angel though, so I guess maybe he just drops them off. The 8 witnesses see them, and then Joseph gives the plates back to the angel, and then I guess Joseph gets the plates back again and finishes the translation. So maybe that's what he meant by supernatural power helped him see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Lucy is saying that the 8 witnesses were showing the plates in the grove, that they were delivered by the angel. So yeah, like it could be a possible reference to why John Whitmer is saying they were shown by a supernatural power, that he believes that there was a supernatural or almighty element to them in order to see the plates. And certainly what I imagine was a spiritual experience for him. I also think it's possible that it could be a conflation by Turley or Bullock, who are recording what John Whitmer had to say, because he used the same wording of a supernatural or almighty power in relation to the dictation of the Book of Mormon. But Steele Manning, like a critic like Dan Vogel, would interpret the use of a supernatural power, the plates being shown to him, meaning that he saw them supernaturally or in a visionary way through a cloth, and it wasn't a natural viewing, which I'm surprised none of them have made that argument.
It's good to know.
Okay, so this is from Hiram Page, and a letter from Hiram Page was published in the Ensign of Liberty in March of 1847. Aside from this signed statement, this is the only other time Hiram Page testifies of seeing the plates. Mike, do you want to read this testimony?
Yeah, it says, as to the Book of Mormon, it would be doing injustice to myself and to the work of God of the last days to say that I could know a thing to be true in 1830 and know the same thing to be false in 1847. Okay. To say my mind was so treacherous that I had forgotten what I saw. To say that a man of Joseph's ability, who at the time did not know how to pronounce the word Nephi, doubtful, could write a book of 600 pages as correct as the Book of Mormon without supernatural power, and to say that those holy angels who came and showed themselves to me as I was walking through the field to confirm me.
Wait, what?
Sorry.
Angel? What?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good. To confirm me in the work of the Lord of the last days, 3 of whom came to me afterwards and sang a hymn in their
What?
own pure language, Adamic language, which we know is we don't need to go into that. Anyways, yes, it would be treating the God of heaven with contempt to deny these testimonies with too many others to mention here.
So I think he's referencing a different time. So he says, and to say that those holy angels who came and showed themselves to me as I was walking through the field, and so to confirm to me, so even Oliver Cowdery says that an angel visited him before he even sees the plates. And so I think he's referencing a different time, but then he also says 3 of whom came to me afterwards and sang a hymn. And again, I don't know if he means 3 ancient Nephites or a different angel.
I know 3 of whom, so that's angels. So.
He says that with only a veiled reference to what I saw, Page does not say that he saw the plates, but that angels confirmed him in his faith. Neither does he say that any coercion was placed upon him to secure his testimony. Despite Page's inconsistencies, it is difficult to know what to make of Harris's affirmation that the 8 saw no plates in the face of John Whitmer's testimony. The original testimony of these 8 men in the Book of Mormon reads somewhat ambiguously, not making clear whether they handled the plates or the leaves of the translated manuscript. Thus, there are some puzzling aspects to the testimonies of the witnesses. If Burnett's statement is given credence, it would appear that Joseph Smith exhorted a deceptive testimony from the 8 witnesses. But why should John Whitmer and Hiram Page adhere to Mormonism and the Book of Mormon so long if they only gave their testimony reluctantly? It may be that, like the 3 witnesses, they expressed a genuine religious conviction. The particulars may not have seemed as important as the ultimate truth of the work.
No.
Okay, so they're saying that Hiram Page, he never denies, but he also talks about he doesn't explicitly say in that statement about seeing the plates, and talks about seeing angels after. So you can understand why people might view Hiram Page as the Martin Harris of the 8 witnesses, claiming to have been visited by angels and receiving revelations through a stone. 2 other statements I have from Hiram Page. This is insisted by Hyrum. This is a letter of Hyrum to William McClellan in 1847. He says, "As to the Book of Mormon, it would be doing injustice to myself and to the work of God of the last days to say that I could know a thing to be true in 1830 and know the same thing to be false in 1847. He doesn't specify about seeing and handling the plates, but this seems to be by implication relation to his testimony of the Book of Mormon as one of the witnesses. Page's son recalled after his death that I knew my father to be true and faithful to his testimony of the divinity of the Book of Mormon until the very last. Whenever he had an opportunity to bear his testimony to this effect, he would always do so and seemed to rejoice exceedingly in having been privileged to see the plates." Which we could interpret as him seeing the plates as one of the 8 witnesses, but we don't have a lot from Hiram Page compared to John Whitmer or Hyrum Smith reaffirming the official testimony. And I think Marvin Hill is actually making a fair or valid point in that quote. If we take Stephen Burnett's testimony seriously, and that it is sort of the gospel truth, then it does seem to be out of harmony with the statements of John Whitmer and particularly Hyrum Smith, and I would say Samuel Smith as well. But when Hiram Page is alluding to seeing the plates, it is ambiguous whether or not he is referring to his testimony of one of the 8 witnesses, or if he's referring to another spiritual experience. Was it this natural viewing of the plates, or was it a visionary visitation by angels? I wish he provided more clarity in his statements. But actually, I disagree with the part where he says the original testimony of these 8 men in the Book of Mormon reads somewhat ambiguously, not making clear whether they handled the plates or the leaves of the translated manuscript. I don't see it ambiguous at all, the official testimony. It seems to be really clear. They say that as many of the leaves as the said Smith has translated, we did handle with our hands, and we saw the engravings thereon, all of which has the appearance of ancient work and curious workmanship. We have seen and hefted, and know surely that the said Smith has got plates of which we have spoken. They absolutely do refer to handling and hefting the plates, not just seeing them like the 3 witnesses in their vision.
So this is Thomas Ford, governor of Illinois. Quote, "The most probable account of these certificates is that the witnesses were in the conspiracy aiding the imposture." But I have been informed by men who were once in the confidence of the prophet that he privately gave a different account of the matter. It is related that the prophet's early followers were anxious to see the plates. The prophet had always given out that they could not be seen by the carnal eye, but must be spiritually discerned, that the power to see them depended upon faith and was the gift of God, to be obtained by fasting, prayer, mortification of the flesh, and exercises of the spirit, that so soon as he could see the evidences of a strong and lively faith in any of his followers, they should be gratified in their holy curiosity. So what I'm getting there is that Joseph Smith told people, like the Bible says about God, you can't see the plates or touch the plates without divine intervention. And that, to me, screams of Joseph needing to explain why he can't just show them to people normally. He needs some excuse so that he can't just show them to people. So he makes up this idea that God and angels have to be involved, right? Which contradicts, is, if I'm remembering right, the 8 witnesses' testimony itself, right? Okay.
With it, where he finishes the story. Do you want to keep going with this one?
He set them to continual prayer and other spiritual experiences to acquire this lively faith by means of which the hidden things of God could be spiritually discerned. And at last, when he could delay them no longer, he assembled them in a room and produced a box, which he said contained the precious treasure. The lid was opened, the witnesses peeped into it, but making no discovery, for the box was empty. They said, "Brother Joseph, we did not see the plates." The prophet answered them, "O ye little faith, how long will God bear with the wicked, this wicked and perverse generation? Down on your knees, brethren, every one of you, and pray God for the forgiveness of your sins and for a holy and living faith which cometh down from heaven." The disciples dropped to their knees and began to pray in the fervency of their spirit, supplicating God for more than 2 hours with fanatical earnestness, at the end of which time, looking again into the box, they were now persuaded that they saw the plates. I leave it to philosophers to determine whether the fumes of an enthusiastic and fanatical imagination are thus capable of blinding the mind and deceiving the senses by so absurd a delusion. And what comes to my mind is 2 things. One is that Martin Harris, how he couldn't see the angel of the plates until he withdrew, and then he was later able to. So this speaks to Joseph's ability to convince people that they were able to see things that they couldn't really see. But what this doesn't account for is the eventual testimony that they handled them with their hands, right? That it was a physical.
Right.
So I don't mean to steal your thunder, Julia. What did you want to say, and then what did everyone else want to say about this account?
Well, this one seems like I almost didn't want to add this one. It's just really fun to hear because it's just a fun story. And we do see Joseph Smith's behaving like this later with other revelations where he's with Sydney and they're like in this, I don't know how to explain this, like trying to see the same vision. Like, do you see this? Yeah, I see it, and that kind of thing. So like this sort of speaks to that. It is very different from the other from the witness statement and from what they said afterwards, because they did say that they saw and they handled. Whereas here they said he's saying he's getting his source from people who were around Joseph, men who were once in the confidence of the prophet. He doesn't give specific names. So it's very different. It's very out there as far as the sources and the testimonies of the witnesses. But it's just really interesting to me that this exists at all.
That you know are real, and then you weave other stuff into it. It kind of feels like that, where it's got details that make sense, especially like you said, Julie, with the 3 witnesses with Martin Harris removing himself because he's not praying hard enough, or he's not in the right spiritual mindset. And then later Joseph comes to him, they do it again, and all of a sudden he claims to see it. So you got that element, but also just it feels too good to be true in terms of like being that descriptive, where there's nothing else in any other contemporary writings that kind of have those same people telling those same stories.
Yeah, the Thomas Ford statement, it's hearsay. It doesn't align with the other statements of the 8 witnesses. You could say there's maybe some elements with regards to needing to have faith in order to see it, and it being covered in a cloth or in a box, and then being like persuaded that they saw the place that needed faith to see it. But yeah, this isn't a serious account. It doesn't align with the testimony of the witnesses. He says that he seems to be informed by men who are once confidants of Joseph, so this is at best third hand. And it doesn't account for the handling of the plates as well, this account. And I do appreciate Mike and Nemo acknowledging that this isn't really a very credible one. It's definitely an outlier, but it's quite a funny one to listen to, quite the narrative.
Conversation with the family, a young man came in and walked across the room to where I was sitting, held a book toward me, saying, "There is a book, sir, I wish you to read." The thing appeared so novel to me that for a moment I hesitated, saying, "Pray, sir, what book have you?" "The Book of Mormon, or, as it is called by some, the Golden Bible." "Ah, sir, then it purports to be a revelation." "Yes," he said, "it is a revelation from God." I took the book, and by his request looked at the testimony of the witnesses. Said he, "If you will read this book with a prayerful heart and ask God to give you a witness, you will know of the truth of this work." I told him I would do so, and then asked him his name. He said his name was Samuel H. Smith. "Ah," I said, "you are one of the witnesses." "Yes," said he. "I know the book to be a revelation from God, translated by the gift and power of the Holy Ghost, and that my brother, Joseph Smith Jr., is a prophet, seer, and revelator."
So I think the reason I point this out is just because he has a chance to speak to a convert or a potential convert about the Book of Mormon, and he's like, "Oh, you're one of the witnesses." And I think with me, if I was Samuel, I would have taken and launched into the story of what, just seeing the plates and handling them. But he doesn't do that. He just says, "I know the book to be a revelation from God, translated by the gift and power of the Holy Ghost."
Yeah.
And that Joseph Smith's a prophet. So he's just, I don't know.
Yeah. Why wouldn't
it's just
you?
not a
Yeah,
very
even
full.
sort of matter of fact,
Yeah.
you would go, "Yeah, I am one of the witnesses. So this is what happened. I held the plates and I looked through them and I saw all the engravings. I've seen these genuinely ancient records, and I know that my brother translated them, and the resulting book is what I've asked you to read." It's just as simple as that. But his job as a witness of the reality of these plates, the crucial thing that Joseph Smith claimed to have that set him apart, that he had these genuine ancient scriptures that he was then translating, he's failed to do. He's already into the gift and power of the God, and by the Holy Ghost you'll know the truthfulness of it. And it's like, well, why do we need the Holy Ghost when you could actually just convince me that the plates are real?
Okay, well, they're arguing, like, why doesn't he talk about being one of the witnesses seeing and handling the plates in this account? I think it's a valid question, but we're going to look at another account where Samuel Smith does refer to seeing and handling the plates. So I don't think it's like a huge criticism, and it's not by any means him denying his testimony as one of the witnesses.
Okay, so then John Whitmer. So according to an interview published in the Deseret News on August 14th of 1878, all 8 witnesses did not view the plates at the same time. They saw them in 2 groups of 4, which is also something that I was never taught at any point in my life. Can you guys like play off of each other? I think it's an interviewer, and then I think it's John.
John, do you want to interview me?
Okay.
So John, you've got the eyes.
I'm I, and Nemo's
Is he?
John Whitmer. Is that
John
right?
Whitmer, baby.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm the Deseret News, and you're John Whitmer.
Indeed.
So did you handle the plates with your hands?
I did so.
Then they were a material substance.
Yes, as material as anything can be.
They were heavy to lift?
Yes, and as you know, gold is a heavy metal. They were very heavy.
How big were the leaves?
So far as I recollect, 8 by 6 or 7 inches.
Were the leaves thick?
Yes, just so thick that characters could be engraven on both sides.
How were the leaves joined together?
In 3 rings, each one in the shape of a D, with a straight line towards the center.
In what place did you see the plates?
In Joseph Smith's house. He had them there.
Did you see them covered with a cloth?
No, he handed them uncovered into our hands, and we turned the leaves sufficient to satisfy us.
Were you all 8 witnesses present at the same time?
No. At that time, Joseph showed the plates to us. We were 4 persons present in the room, and at another time he showed them to 4 persons more.
Okay, thank you. So I just think that's super interesting because I think in most of the visual aids and things like that, even we showed one earlier where all 8 are together in the woods. And Lucy Mack Smith said that they went to the grove, and you had said that you pointed out about the Jewish nature of doing that. So we have some saying that it was in the woods, and then John Whitmer saying it was in the house, but he doesn't know where the other ones saw it. Also, why would Joseph Smith split it up? And also, if four are seeing them, and then 4 are seeing them at a different time, why are they all signing
only
the same?
for the 4 Whitmers?
But also, like, that seems kind of problematic to me with the signing all the same document, because they're 2 different witnesses. Like, I don't know. I just think that's a little odd.
So, I mean, there's a few things in there though, that are interesting. Like if you pull that back up, he talks about, he describes leaves again. So he said, we turned the leaves sufficiently to satisfy us. So that puts poo-poo to that other guy's argument about how leaves
Marvin
might
Hill,
have been. Yeah. So
because he's referencing the actual pages of.
Yeah, and he's there turning the leaves to satisfy us because we handled them, the plates, uncovered. And this weird sort of squirrely language, as material as anything can be. Like, what is he on about? Like, is he a philosopher? Like, That's a really weird way to phrase
It
it if
is.
you're not trying to leave yourself wiggle room for pushback.
I forgot he had the link.
Yeah, I mean,
End them off, you know.
but it's also the same. Oh yeah, I was saying it's also the same thing as the three witnesses, where Martin Harris has to go because he doesn't see it, and then he sees it later, and then they sign a statement as if they're all there, and so it makes you
Yeah.
wonder. I mean, we'll never know the answer to this, but it makes you wonder which four were left off the first time. Is it four people are like, dude, I'm not seeing crap, and Joseph's like, why don't you go outside? We'll get to you in a second. Go fast some more, and then I'll get you some sacramental wine. Maybe you'll start seeing stuff. And so I don't know. That's what I'm wondering. I'm like, why did he split them up? Because four weren't seeing it, like Martin Harris didn't see it, or is he doing it where he's like, you four are good? I got through this. Okay, you guys believe this? Okay, bring it's, I don't know. It's all speculative.
I joked that it was a Whitmer family only event for the first one.
Yeah.
But actually there are two neat groups there. There is Joseph Smith's family plus Hiram Page, and then there's the Whitmers. So it could make sense. If I was, again, we don't know who the groups were, but it could make sense that he can easily convince the Whitmer family to have the same experience, and then he convinces his own family and Hiram Page to have the experience.
So like maybe it's easier to lead if you're going with that theory.
Yeah,
easier to lead through that experience with a smaller group.
A smaller group and a group of people that are related, because they're all invested in each other, like in supporting each other through familial ties as well as through a shared magical worldview.
So my thoughts on this one. So in this interview with William Poulsen, John Whitmer is saying that the plates were shown to him uncovered and that they turned the leaf, so that this could be cited to support that the plates weren't covered in a cloth. I don't know what to make of this interview because it's different from Lucy Mack Smith's account of them all 8 going to a grove, and that's how it's depicted in art. But the other witnesses don't explain the circumstances for how they saw the plates. So he's saying that 4 of them saw it in the house and then the next 4 after. Could that be true? Like, maybe. And similar, because like Martin Harris wasn't present when Oliver and David saw the angel in the plates. He had his vision separate from them. I don't see that as necessarily problematic, that all 8 didn't like see the plates at the same time. I know Dan Vogel doesn't believe that William Poulsen is a reliable interviewer. David Whitmer thought he wasn't quite accurate, and this was published after John Whitmer's death. So I think I have to be skeptical of this source, even though apologists would like the fact that he says that the leaves were turned uncovered. However, they're even trying to use this source to support like Joseph bringing 4 at a time and then trying to convince them to see the plates. Like if we're using this source and believing this source that 4 went at a time, it doesn't support them seeing it in a supernatural or visionary way, because John Whitmer states, according to the interviewer, that he looked over the plates uncovered. There was no cloth. There was no supernatural element needed to see the plates. So I don't know, because I don't see any other statements where the witnesses specify the circumstances. Was it all 8 in a grove? We just have the account from Lucy Mack Smith, who again wasn't present. This is years after the fact. But then how accurate is this interview as well? I don't fully know.
Another one of John Whitmer's testimonies. As published in the Saints Herald in August of 1878, Myron H. Bond interviewed John Whitmer. Old Father Whitmer told me last winter, with tears in his eyes, that he knew as well as he knew he had an existence, that Joseph translated the ancient writing, which was upon the plates, which he saw and handled, and which as one of the scribes he helped to copy as the words fell from Joseph's lips by supernatural or almighty power.
Yeah, so this quote, which we read earlier as well, interview with Myron Bond, just seems to reaffirm and realign and align with the official testimony of seeing and handling the plates. And the language of supernatural power is with regards to the translation and dictation of the Book of Mormon.
So this one just confirms he also sees and he handles the plates.
Yep.
We have another one from Samuel. In 1883, Daniel Tyler recalled visiting Samuel Smith in Pennsylvania in the spring of 1832, which resulted in his own conversion. Daniel recorded, Elder Samuel Smith read the 29th chapter of Isaiah at the first meeting and delineated the circumstances of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, of which he said he was a witness. He knew his brother Joseph had the plates, for the prophet had shown them to him, and he had handled them and seen the engravings thereon. His speech was more like a narrative than a sermon. So this one again supports the original statement of the...
Funny the critique they had of the earlier quote from Samuel Smith, talking about that he knows the Book of Mormon to be a true revelation from God. Well, why didn't he talk about being one of the witnesses of the gold plates? He seems to do it in this quote, talking about seeing and handling the plates. very much in line with the official testimony, nothing about a spiritual view or seeing through a cloth.
And then with Jacob Whitmer, we've only got 2 from him, and they're both from his kids, and they read very similarly. According to Andrew Jensen, John C. Whitmer shared his father's testimony. My father, Jacob Whitmer, was always faithful and true to his testimony in regard to the Book of Mormon, and confirmed it on his deathbed. And then he has another kid. In the same year, Jacob's other son, Captain David P. Whitmer, used almost the same language as his other son. I got the name wrong. As his other son, John C. Whitmer. My father, Jacob Whitmer, was always faithful and true to his testimony to the Book of Mormon, and confirmed it on his deathbed. In fact, I think, are there different words, or are they both the same? It's just interesting to me that 2 of his kids are using the exact same words. And these 2 testimonies are the only thing that we have from Jacob outside of the 8 witness statement.
That's a pity we don't have more from Jacob Whitmer. It appears that he confirmed his testimony to his deathbed, but it's disappointing that for some of the 8 witnesses, we don't have more of their statements. But I think we have enough that, at least in their primary or their secondhand statements, they seem to reaffirm their testimonies, and nobody seems to be contradicting or denying it.
As I said at the beginning, the 8 witnesses, because it's a physical event, because this is literally plates on a table that any person off the street can walk in and see, you would have a reporter, you'd have a governor, you'd have all of the people that are telling us that Joseph Smith is a con man going in there and seeing him and going, holy crap, Joseph Smith was not making it up. He's telling the truth. This is true. And they go out, and you've got governors, you've got reporters saying, this is the real deal, guys. But instead, the God of Mormonism chooses 2 families to go in there that are already believers in the magical worldview to do it. To me, that tells you beyond any doubt that Joseph Smith knows that he doesn't have plates with ancient engravings, that he is making this up, whether it's a prop set of plates or whether it's something else. Because if this could pass physical inspection, he would be showing people outside of his inner circle so that people would believe. And so I guess I would just summarize it by saying the reason I think this is more important is because we're seeing how the sausage is made, and we're seeing how unconfident Joseph Smith is that these could pass physical inspection. And because he's unconfident, you can see in the approaches he's taking to getting these witnesses that he's doing everything he can to make sure this doesn't get out beyond his inner circle that already believes this. And so for me, that's why it's important. And that's why the 8 witnesses are really important, just as 116 pages. It's showing us how Joseph Smith is trying to navigate building belief in him as a prophet while also not being willing to actually show what he's got going on.
I feel like this is back to the same argument at the beginning, that if Joseph really did have ancient gold plates, he would have shown them to everybody and not just a few followers or a few witnesses. And you can make the exact same argument when it comes to Jesus' resurrection. Surely if Jesus resurrected, he would have appeared to unbelievers and skeptics. He would have went to Pontius Pilate. He would have went to Herod. He would have shown himself to Nero. This just shows the God of Christianity is so weak and inefficient to only show Jesus to his disciples. I feel like you can make the exact same argument against, the resurrection of Jesus, which is fine if you want to make that argument. I feel like it makes less sense if a Christian were to make this argument against the Book of Mormon witnesses of the gold plates, but then to say, oh, well, the witnesses of Christ's resurrection are credible. And obviously, in terms of the resurrection of Christ, and with the gold plates, we would believe that faith is still required, still an element.
I disagree on some of those points there.
Yeah, please do.
Or I can certainly...
That's why he hates you, Nemo.
Yeah. No. What do you got, Nemo? What you got this time?
I can certainly see the apologetic argument around, you have to look no further than the temple to see what is the difference between secret and sacred, right? So it wasn't that Joseph Smith was keeping these secret from people. He wasn't trying to hide them. They were just too sacred to show to people who had not gone through the sufficient spiritual mortification of the flesh. They'd not gone through the sufficient fasting and praying in order to be in the presence of such sacred objects. And this from a God who struck people down for touching something they weren't meant to touch. He struck people dead for touching something that everyone could look at, but they weren't allowed to touch, right? You can't steady the ark or you'll be struck down. So there's scriptural precedent for an object so sacred that only certain people can interact with it, even if it is real.
I'm glad that Nemo is at least disagreeing or at least representing the apologetic or faithful position. I think there is scriptural precedence for this, and the belief would be that God commanded only a few to be witnesses, and that he didn't want Joseph to reveal the plates to everybody.
An apologist will say the local reporter, the governor, a mayor, they don't have faith. But this is a physical event. This is the corner the church puts himself in by saying these are plates on a table. I don't need faith to know that this, I still have it near me, that this is a Nerf dart. I don't need plates to see that I've got a cup here. So to then say that, well, Nemo can't look at this plate, this cup in person because he has no faith. It's an argument that is so stupid that you would never give it to anyone else. And so, I'm just being as blunt as I can here. This is an argument that the church is making because they know full well that when they show the cards are saying Joseph's made it up. So
But when Mike's saying that the reason Joseph didn't show it to everybody is because they wouldn't pass visible inspection, they obviously passed visible inspection when it came to the 8 witnesses. I would agree with Mike's argument if Joseph never showed it to anybody, but kept the plates hidden and always covered in a cloth. But the fact he chose 8 witnesses, who at least to them, they thought the plates visually looked authentic, undermines this argument in my view.
Yeah, you could retreat to that position, but I'm saying the church would never give that space to someone else. If someone else, I'm just going to throw out hypothetically, Hiram Page came out and said, I've got revelation. The church isn't going to go, well, it's true because people believe it. They're going to say it's not true because it can't be, because that infringes on us being the one true church led by Joseph Smith. And so you're not going to give the same space to any other religion. You're engaging in special pleading. If those plates would pass physical inspection, Joseph Smith would have showed them to people just as he showed the Book of Abraham scrolls, and it would have grown the church, and it would have grown the church immensely to a point that it would have been the most important event in modern history. And the God of Mormonism, if he really wants everyone to come back to him, would have been like, Joseph, get those plates out in front of many skeptical people and influential people as you can, because I want my children to come back to me. He wouldn't go, dude, just show them to the Whitmers, show them to your family, and make sure that no one else can see them. It's
God's ways are not our ways, Michael.
I get the apologetic is God's ways are not our ways, but I'm going to say that the God of Mormonism sucks at growing his church, because the God of Mormonism made his prophet out to be a fraud in the Book of Abraham, didn't show these plates to anyone but people who already believed and who already were very gullible to worldviews, and also believed a nut job that claimed he had his own seer stone that was giving revelation so bad that it had to be deemed from the devil. I'm just saying, and I'm being blunt here, the God of the Mormon church is horrible at growing his church because he's doing all of these things in every way that tells the world that his prophet's making it up. And so I'm pushing back on what you're saying because I get what you're saying. I hear it all the time.
I can hear that.
Well, if you're going to make the argument that the God of Mormonism is terrible at trying to bring his children back to him, you can make the exact same argument with if the God of Christianity really wanted to convert everyone to Jesus and bring everyone back to heaven, then he would just send the resurrected Jesus to everybody, so then everyone would know that Jesus is the resurrected Son of God, that he lives, and everyone will be saved. And if that's how you think God should work, then I can understand why you'd have difficulty believing in him. But if you believe in the Bible, if you believe in Jesus, and also in the Book of Mormon, the scriptures talk a lot about faith. Not faith without evidence, but not proof to eliminate faith. And in the case of Jesus' resurrection, he chose Jesus' disciples to go out and testify of it. And similar to believers and followers of Joseph Smith and the gold plates. And again, this just gets back to their assumption that they assumed that if Joseph had authentic gold plates, that he should have showed them to everybody. But he was put under a strict command to not show them. The plates had to be protected. They could have been stolen, and he was commanded to only show them to a few. So yeah, I think he's been quite spicy here, but I feel like a very similar argument could be made against Christians and, Jesus' resurrection, only showing himself to a few of the disciples.
I want to get everyone else in, but I just want to ask, let's just say there's 3 options. Option 1 is that they really saw real plates. Okay. I'm assuming that no one here believes that. Option number 2 is that he showed them something and, well, yeah, okay. There's going to be 4 options. Option 1 is that this all really happened in some amalgam of what we've talked about, and that there are plates and there are angels, etc. Option 2 is that he showed them stuff, maybe fake plates, and created a genuine impression in them with physical artifacts that they were actually witnessing to something. A third is that he whipped them into some sort of spiritual testimony where no actual physical stuff were ever seen. And then a fourth is that it was all made up and it was like a conspiracy that they were all in on to lie, or that sort of undue pressure was applied so that they would sign agreements to things that never really happened. I want to go around the horn. Julia, 1, 2, 3, or 4 for you.
So I don't think that there's an actual ancient set of gold plates. There's too many problems with that.
Not one.
So I think no. And I also think no to the last one, because these people went on to believe, like, they also, in their own testimonies, they don't say that they were coerced. They don't say that they were pressured. So I don't think that one is either. I think it could be very likely that Joseph Smith made a prop set of plates. And what was your other option?
So 2 is real artifacts. 3 is all spiritual.
Well, and then just like with the 3 witnesses, which seems all spiritual based on everything that we went over last time, that one could be very likely as well. So I don't know between the 2 whether it was all spiritual or there was a prop set of plates.
Okay, so you're saying 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Mike, what's your vote?
I'm with Julia. I think the conspiracy thing to me doesn't make sense because Joseph Smith runs them out of the church. If they were in a conspiracy, they would have turned on him. And then obviously there's no ancient plates. We've talked about how the fact that just doesn't work in any possible way. So
spiritual eyes, physical eyes.
I would say probably had a prop set plate. I think he probably had a prop set of plates, and I think he probably also did what we saw with the vision with Sidney Rigdon, where it's like, I see this, do you see this? And they're like, yeah, I see that. What do you see?
Okay, wait.
Yeah, I agree with them that I think definitely it being a conspiracy doesn't work. So they're kind of torn between, did Joseph Smith have sort of a plate artifact that he was able to trick the witnesses with, or was it a spiritual or visionary viewing covered in a cloth? And I can see they're torn between the 2 because a lot of the statements support them actually seeing and handling. What John says next is quite interesting to Mike, because Mike is trying to go more with the 3rd option, that they were covered in a cloth. But John's going to bring up, but what about the statements where they talk about seeing the plates uncovered?
They're plates. They're seeing them with their eyes.
Or
They're
holding them under a cloth.
No, but they said there's no cloth. Like, they're seeing them, they're touching them, and they crinkle.
I think John's got it.
Gorilla. He's got it.
And they're gold.
Exactly.
And there's rings, and they're reading Egyptian characters.
The crinkle only comes from Emma, and that's from underneath the cloth,
they do say
right?
it's as thin as a sheet of parchment. Do they say that in one of them?
Really good point, John. He's bringing up they say there's no cloth, and none of the primary statements of any of the 8 witnesses talk about the plates being under a cloth. That seems to be Stephen Burnett's inference from what Martin has said. And again, Martin is not one of the 8 witnesses. And that one from Theodore Turley, I think, is a very ambiguous one. And I think that there's better explanations for the plates being shown by a supernatural power. But over and over and over, they refer to seeing and handling the plates in a very natural way. Now, I'm going to acknowledge, I don't even see it as, like, impossible that Joseph could have created his own set of plates, etched or engraved characters on them, and then presented a set of plates that pass visible inspection. But that doesn't mean they're ancient or divine. I think it definitely makes it more of a compelling and more improbable fraud, more impressive for Joseph to pull off. But it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And I believe that the data and the testimonies of the 8 witnesses support that if it wasn't a divine ancient record delivered by an angel, then it had to be that.
That's
thicker
than regular
Or
paper.
tin?
Make that.
Tin.
I don't think he did. I mean, I think
That's different than
people
crappy plates that don't have engravings, that are super rough. Like, what they're testifying to is seeing something that really looked like golden plates.
Yeah. So Mike is trying to argue for a prop set of plates that they saw covered in a cloth. But as John Dillon is even acknowledging from a lot of the statements they've read, that they're referring to, like, really seeing and handling plates. And it seems like Mike doesn't want to acknowledge all of the statements that they give, where they say that they saw and handled the plates. But John is even recognizing that the majority of their statements do support that. And that doesn't fit in with the view or the conclusion that Mike has.
It hefted around 30 pounds, right?
I think there's so much ambiguity in those statements that it's hard for me to say, like, oh yeah, they saw him on a table uncovered, because I also think when you read those statements and when you read what Martin Harris says, I don't think that statement is probably what happened. So I guess I'm kind of like what Julia said, you have a little of 2, a little of 3. You got a little bit of that. Joseph may have had a prop set of plate. And then, if you listen to Dan Vogel he did a podcast, or not, he did an episode on YouTube on the 3 and the 8 witnesses. And then I think it's on the 8 witnesses. I think he talks about the studies that have been done on, like, getting kind of inducing spiritual hallucinations, inducing that vision. Joseph Smith does it. I mean, we've seen it throughout the history of the church. And so I'm saying that maybe you have a prop set of plates, and maybe you have these people fast all day, and then you give them sacramental wine, and all of a sudden they're loosened up. They're already believers in magical worldview. So you can use that prop set to basically initiate more. But at the same time, it's
that's so speculative, that theory, because none of the 8 witnesses talk about that there being this spiritual visionary component to it, that there being, sacramental wine, that they were fasting beforehand. Like, I think that there's some problems with Burnett's statements, but all of the other statements are in line with the official testimony, supporting a natural seeing and handling of the plates. And Mike is trying to come to the conclusion that it must have been this spiritual viewing, that Joseph had this prop set of plates, but they were covered in the cloth. But the evidence leans towards it either being number 2 or number 1. I don't see number 3 really as a probable scenario for the 8 witnesses' experience.
4 and then 4, right?
Yeah, he would. But I also think when you have a signed statement that conflates,
I don't see how he manufactured plates that reflect what they're saying they saw.
No,
Well, this is where
but I don't think you have to.
You can see that John is now saying that, well, he doesn't believe that Joseph could have manufactured tin plates with the appearance of gold that resemble what they claimed that they saw. So therefore, it had to have been a visionary experience under the cloth, even though that goes against what their statements are. And I tend to agree. I don't find it impossible, but I find it highly improbable that Joseph could have pulled this off naturally, which is why believers or apologists would view it as, number 1, that it was ancient plates received by an angel. Because it does seem like quite the con for Joseph to have manufactured his own set of tin plates that would have passed visible inspection for the 8 witnesses with engravings on it with the appearance of gold, which is what they claim. But John and the others don't believe that Joseph could have done that, so therefore it must be number 3, even though their testimony and their statements don't seem to support the third option of it being a visionary experience under a cloth.
Yeah, this is where you have language.
Spiritual eyes, not physical eyes and hands.
So this, So this is where you have language that spiritual eyes are what are needed to see what is truly upon the plates, because what is upon the plates is so sacred that it's hidden from the natural eyes of men, and that's why the plates appear blank, or whatever language you would like to use.
Do any of the 8 witnesses in their primary statements talk about seeing with spiritual eyes, seeing in a visionary way? No, it aligns with the official testimony. So they're having to reinterpret, they're having to say, despite many of the statements that they've gone through that support the official testimony, it had to have been spiritual eyes.
And that's why he has to engage this spiritual element of it so that they see the plates for what they really are, not as blank silver plates, but as the gold plates. Right, so that's I agree with Mike, surprisingly.
And look, Joseph creating his own set of tin plates that pass visual inspection, I've acknowledged, I don't even see it as impossible. We have the Saudi Arabian plates, which have been, there's been a lot of content put out about them, which are likely a hoax. Strang also made his own set of plates. I do find it improbable that Joseph was able to create his own naturalistically, but it's not impossible. They just can't go with that conclusion, despite the data pointing to it, because they acknowledge that that is an even more impressive and unlikely thing for Joseph to have pulled off.
Directly engraven with the Book of Mormon, and Joseph Smith showed me the Urim and Thummim light up with letters that pop off the hat. I mean, it's very vague, so it's all speculative.
Those tin plates you've got, John, are quite dull, right? Say Joseph was using sheets of tin that were slightly thinner, and he'd hammered in some ways. They got some slight ripples to them, and he'd polished them up, right? Then he sat them in a room. Say they didn't go out to the grove, because we have a testimony that they went to his house, right? So they're in a house by flickering warm orange candlelight, reflecting
Depending on the
off,
time of day.
depending on the time of day, reflecting off reflective surfaces with ripples in them. And that is a recipe for someone to say, if they heard, they glue, the plates glowed with a heavenly glow, and they were, as fire or whatever, right? They're a golden color. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Add to that some sacramental wine, like Mike said, and some spiritual, some cognitive preloading from Joseph Smith for what they should expect to see, and you can manufacture an experience.
And the Whitmer family would have been very familiar with the characters. So now, to Nemo's point, you've got this set of prop plates, you've got a dimly lit room, you've got candlelight, and you have all of these people who are familiar with the characters document, who are familiar with what they believe.
Where's the evidence that it was a dimly lit room they were fasting beforehand and drinking wine beforehand. Like what? Like, you're basically trying to recreate your own narrative for what the 8 witnesses experienced, because you don't believe that the 8 witnesses could have had the experience that they claim in their primary statements. Like, just watch how they're convincing John, even though John was saying, but wait, look at all their statements. They talk about like seeing and handling the plates in a natural way. And they're just postulating this speculative narrative. Like, the only really 2 sources that critics could use to support this being a visionary viewing under cloth is the third-hand statement by Stephen Burnett, which I view as problematic, and Martin Harris isn't even one of the 8 witnesses. So even if he is recording Martin accurately, it's not coming firsthand from the 8 witnesses, and their other statements reaffirm the official testimony, and they're omitting or dodging all of the other statements from the 8 witnesses because it doesn't fit with their view. So they're now having to make it some spiritual event, coming up with things which, trying to find like these other explanations for it. It's kind of frustrating. Okay, fine. If you want to conclude that the 8 witnesses, you don't believe it was a natural, tangible viewing, seeing and holding the plates, but you believe it was some sort of a spiritual thing, that the plates were covered in a cloth, that they just saw the engravings in their mind, and that Joseph led them through some sort of spiritual, mystic, visionary experience, fine. But don't argue that that's what the evidence and their statements support, because it doesn't. Yeah, no, it's very, very consistent with the official testimony. There's another time when Hiram Smith, it's recorded, he was talking about the Book of Mormon, of which he is one of the witnesses, and he said that he had but 2 hands and 2 eyes. He said he had seen the plates with his eyes and handled them with his hands. And I can't help but wonder if this is sort of a response, because this is like a year after of him clarifying that, no, we really did see them with our eyes and with our hands, and I only have 2 eyes and 2 hands. There's maybe 1 or 2 statements at best that might support that position, but I do not think that they're strong or reliable. And if I were a critic, and if I were being intellectually consistent, I would say that I think the majority of their statements support Joseph forging a set of metal tin plates with engravings on them that he showed to the witnesses. And they thought that they passed visible inspection, but they didn't. They were just 19th century manufactured, similar to Strang's plates. But trying to argue that what they actually experienced was a set of plates covered in a cloth, and they just went through this spiritual exercise and all this speculation about Joseph dimming the lights, giving them some wine, making them fast, and that's how they saw it. Like, where's your evidence to support that? Because you already dismissed the Thomas Ford statement as hearsay, but your recreation sounds the closest to what he claimed of what the 8 witnesses experienced. But my conclusion on the 8 witnesses of the gold plates is, again, the vast majority of their statements, and maybe we'll just read through some of them again. Okay, I'll quickly just go through some of their statements again. So this one comes from Dan Vogel's Early Mormon Documents. It's an interview John Whitmer had with William Poulsen, and he's asked, did you see them covered with a cloth, the gold plates? He answered no. He handed them uncovered into our hands and turned the leaf sufficient to satisfy us. Letter by Myron Bond in 1878 says that old Father Whitmer told me last winter with tears in his eyes that he knew as well as he knew he had an existence, that Joseph translated the ancient writing which was upon the plates which he saw and handled. E.C. Brand's report of his interview with John Whitmer in 1845 says, I visited Mr. John Whitmer at his residence at Far West. He also bore his testimony to me concerning the truth and declared that his testimony, as found in the testimony of the 8 witnesses in the Book of Mormon, is strictly true. Handwriting of Thomas Bullock of the Theodore Turley's memorandums, John Whitmer says, I now say I handled those plates. There are fine engravings on both sides. I handled them. It wasn't a spiritual viewing. Hiram Page had to say that he rejoiced exceedingly in having privilege to see the plates. John Whitmer, this is firsthand in the Messenger and Advocate in 1836, says, I may not be amiss in this place to give a statement to the world concerning the work of the Lord, as I have been a member of this Church of Latter-day Saints from its beginning, to say that the Book of Mormon is a revelation from God, I have no hesitancy, but with all confidence have signed my name to it as such. I hope that my patrons will indulge me in speaking freely on this subject. Therefore, I desire to testify to all that will come to the knowledge of this address that I have most assuredly seen the plate whence the Book of Mormon is translated, that I have handled these plates, and know of a surety that Joseph Smith Jr. has translated the Book of Mormon by the gift and power of God. Statement by John Whitmer was given firsthand 1836, 2 years prior to the account by Stephen Burnett. And John Whitmer is saying that he had no hesitancy but signed with all confidence his name to the official testimony, and he also testified to seeing and handling the plates. So this is coming firsthand from one of the 8 witnesses, basically debunking 2 of the claims that Stephen Burnett makes in his statement regarding the testimony. Samuel Smith said, 1832, he read the 29th chapter of Isaiah at the first meeting and delineated the circumstances of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, which he said he was a witness. He knew his brother Joseph had the plates, for the prophet had shown them to him, and he had handled them and seen the engravings thereon. We have the accounts of Jacob Whitmer affirming his death, affirming his testimony to his deathbed according to his son. Hiram Smith said, talking about the Book of Mormon, which he is one of the witnesses, he said he had but 2 hands and 2 eyes. He said he had seen the plates with his eyes and handled them with his hands. Mary Fielding Smith also bears testimony that her husband Hyrum has seen and handled the plates. Hiram's final testimony he wrote in December 1839. He said, I thank God that I felt a determination to die rather than deny the things which my eyes had seen and which my hands had handled, and which I had borne testimony to. John Whitmer wrote a lengthy letter to him, including the following. John Whitmer says, I've never heard him deny the truth of his testimony of the Book of Mormon under any circumstance whatsoever. I believe this is with regards to Oliver Cowdery. I have never heard that any of the 3 or 8 witnesses ever denied the testimony that they have borne to the Book of Mormon as published in the edition of the Book of Mormon. Our names have gone forth to all nations, tongues, and people as a divine revelation from God, and it will bring to pass the designs of God according to the declaration therein declared. And look, I can understand if someone wants to make the argument that I don't believe the testimony of the 3 or the 8 witnesses because either I don't believe in the supernatural, I don't believe that there's a God, or I don't believe the Book of Mormon is historical. I'm more persuaded by evidence or arguments going against Book of Mormon historicity. Therefore, the 3 and the 8 witnesses can't be telling the truth, or they can't be correct about their experiences. They could still be telling the truth, but be mistaken. The 3 witnesses might have had a hallucination. The 8 witnesses might have been tricked by plates that Joseph Smith manufactured. That's an understandable position. But I feel like trying to undermine their testimonies, trying to find inconsistencies where you're focusing on a few second, third-hand statements and ignoring the vast majority of their primary statements in order to fit in with your predetermined conclusion of their experience, I feel like isn't an intellectually honest or consistent approach. And I feel like these attacks don't really hold up when we closely examine the data. I feel like the majority of their statements, both with the 3 and the 8 witnesses, aligns and supports their official testimony. Now, does that mean it's really true and happened? No, but I feel like the efforts that critics are employing to try to find fault or inconsistency with their testimony, I feel like the sources they cite tend to be not credible and tend to go against their primary statements. And look, I'm gonna acknowledge, like, it's quite hard to believe the narrative of Joseph receiving plates from an angel, the angel coming and showing the 3 witnesses the plates, it being this visionary experience, them hearing the voice of God, and then the 8 witnesses being shown ancient gold plates. Like, that is a miracle. That is hard to believe. But I also find it quite improbable and very hard to believe, and almost more miraculous, that Joseph prophesied that the witnesses would see the gold plates, that the 3 witnesses had this mass hallucination, which they never denied, which they are absolutely sure that it was real. They saw with their eyes and heard with their ears. It wasn't a hallucination, juggling, a trick, a vain imagination to them. And Joseph was able to manufacture his own set of tin plates having the appearance of gold with engravings to pass visible inspection by the 8 witnesses, who again reaffirmed their testimony of seeing and handling the plates. I think that's quite a thing for Joseph to have pulled off if he was a fraud. And I don't believe that their testimonies can be dismissed. And the 8 witnesses' testimony, while not as miraculous or as powerful as the 3, they do seem to be quite consistent with their official testimony of seeing and handling the plates. And not just this magical object or this brick or something that Joseph had under a cloth, but actual metal plates with rings and engravings on. And this isn't to mention the other people who testified to there being some plate artifact holding it covered in the cloth, where you had Mary Whitmer's experience of being shown the plates by the angel. Combined, I do see that the combination of the 3 and the 8 witnesses certainly as evidence or an argument in favor for the authenticity of the plates. But I certainly believe that they are sincere. I do not believe they are part of a conspiracy, and I believe that they sincerely know and believe what they experience. I do believe that there are some arguments and evidence in favor for the Book of Mormon, which I talked about in my top 10 evidences for the Book of Mormon video. Not enough to take away the necessity for faith. And there are still some good arguments and criticisms going against the Book of Mormon being ancient and historical. But I don't find the criticisms against the witnesses, I don't feel like they're really that strong. I feel like their testimonies are consistent, they are powerful, they line up with the official testimonies, they reaffirm throughout their lives, they never deny. I don't feel like these episodes have really done well at trying to explain away or debunk the sincerity and the conviction of their testimonies. And particularly this video, I found very unpersuasive in their arguments that they are making. Thanks so much for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone for watching this episode. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like, share it with others who might benefit, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future content. You can also listen to these episodes on podcast form on Anchor or Spotify, and you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Check out my website for more content, personal blog, and more. And if you care to donate to support me, you can via my PayPal or Patreon, or through the website. And you can also give donations via YouTube through Super Chats. Thanks for watching Mormonism with the Murph. Take care. Bye-bye.